Imagine you're working for a successful company, and one day, one of your loyal customers walks in and asks you to create a product. They tell you what they want, what they expect, maybe give you a few examples of already existing products that are similar to what they want, but not entirely. If you're an engineer, you probably already know where I'm going with this. So, you give your finished product to your customer, and they say, okay, looks good, but can you add this other feature? Now, at this point, your job is done. The product is delivered, it works, but they're asking for more. You can either give in, charge them extra, and add the useless feature, but you risk destroying what you've already created. Or you can be sensible and tell your customer plain and simply, I know what you want, I know what you think you want, but trust me, you really don't want that. This is where we are with Warhammer 40k right now. At present, we have so many big projects coming in the next couple of years designed to shoot 40k right into the stratosphere of mainstream media. We're basically living the dream any Warhammer fan has had for the past 2 decades. So I'll put it plain and simple. You don't want this. It'd be easy for me to look at the overall issue and simply blame it all on leftist identity politics. That is the woke movement. Don't get me wrong, it is part of the problem, but it's more complicated than that. This is a bit of an expansion on what my last topic was about, that is 40k no longer being grimdark, losing its identity. What some fans don't know is that a long time ago, way before the woke movement was even a thing, 40k was already on a decline. I don't want to say exactly when it began, as that's somewhat debatable by the community. Some say it was around 6th edition, others 7th, but the decline was there. It's just that the mediocrity has been buried under a mountain of virtue signaling woke crap so deep it makes these old editions look like gold by comparison. One of the problems we've been carrying along is constant Codex creep with every new edition. Codex creep happens when the old lore gets replaced by the new lore without any sensible justifications, so a retcon. The most recent example I can think of is when the Elders had their Wraithbone lore change. For those of you who don't know, Wraithbone is a type of material used by the Elder to construct their buildings, their weapons, armor, pretty much everything. It's an essential resource for the Elder race, and the way the lore described the creation of such material was pretty unique. Essentially, Wraithbone is warp energy itself, made manifest through singing. Those Elders specialized in this craft were called Bone Singers, and at their utmost potential, they could manifest entire colonies and spaceships out of thin air, or warp. This unique way of crafting the foundations of their civilization gave the Elders a really unique flavor or identity in the lore. So what did Games Workshop do to fuck this up? Well, they threw this part of the Codex away and replaced it with mining for the resource instead. So the Elder no longer sing these structures and weapons into existence, they simply mine for it like pretty much every other race in the game, killing the magic both literally and figuratively. There's no politics involved here, it's just sheer fucking incompetence. Or as some people speculate, it's an attempt by Games Workshop to make the lore more digestible for a new audience, mainstreaming the whole thing. Another example is the Primaris Marines. Remember how cool Space Marines were? Well, that's no longer the case, because now we have new upgraded Space Marines that are bigger, stronger and faster than the regular Space Marines. And the reason for their existence? Some tech priests came out of nowhere and decided to rework the Emperor's original Space Marines blueprints and thought he could do better, which is heretical as fuck by lore standards and it makes no sense, but here we are. Games Workshop wanted to upgrade the regular Space Marines, but instead of coming up with a smart and lore-accurate way to improve them, they just threw this piece of shit to the wall and prayed everybody will simply go along with it. And these are just some of the most recent examples. Before any of this happened, we already had chapters of Space Marines that were slowly getting brushed aside forgotten. I remember when there was a time when all you ever heard about for a few years were pretty much Blood Ravens, Blood Angels, and the Ultramarines, and really not much else. The lore gets updated and refined based on a popularity contest. If you're a fan of an underdog faction or a piece of lore that doesn't sell as much as others, you're out of luck. You'll never get what you want. Moreover, every update will render it more and more useless compared to the current meta. This all makes sense when you realize that Games Workshop hasn't had any clear goals or visions for the 40k lore in a really long while. It used to be that the writers will come up with stuff they liked, like really grimdark stuff, and simply put it out there whether people liked it or not. After some time and after reviewing fans' responses, they simply adjust it a little bit and then move on. Nowadays, the writers have a list of checkboxes they need to fill in to appease specific groups that, while not being majorities, are pretty vocal about their dissatisfactions. And I'm not even talking about the woke mob yet. I'm talking about 40k's 8th edition, for example, and how focused it was on taking 40k to the competitive side of tabletop gaming, which was great for the audience in that part of the hobby, but it ruined it for everybody else. Not only did we get massive amounts of Codex script that overshadow all playstyles, the rules got simplified and streamlined to a point. Narrative campaigns were a joke. At least it felt that way if you're an old school player. And this is the problem. Games Workshop has spent over 10 years aggressively trying to market 40k to the wider audience and whales that find their IP attractive enough to spend a fortune in it. This became evident to me in 6th edition, when there was a strange emphasis on large models. I don't know what's up with armies in gaming, but as soon as you introduce large models, you're on a timer, a countdown, a ticking bomb for the whole game to go to shit. I've seen it happen in tabletop 40k, and I've seen it happen in Total War Warhammer Fantasy. All the focus goes on these large units, and then the game slowly shifts away from tactical army management to single power pieces that become the center of every army. What's worse, these large units are always busted, meaning that they are so overpowered it takes a lot of resources to take them down, taking all the fun away if you go against them. Mix it up with ridiculous price tags, and if you couldn't afford one of these large units, you'd get run over by them in any type of competitive gaming every single time. I'm bringing up all of these examples to illustrate how easy it is for a company to lose their focus. What once began as a project to create a unique, dark and mysterious universe devolved into, what is the finance department focus on this year? Make no mistake, the people in charge of these IPs are no longer the creators themselves. It's the finance department, okay? In particular, the marketing department. The people looking at graphs and sales strategies with nothing but capital gain in mind are the same ones telling writers what to do, choosing what goes or doesn't go in every new edition. I saw it happen to 40k in the 2000s, and later on to Fantasy Warhammer. I saw it happen to Creative Assembly with the Total War games. I saw it happen to Square Enix with their RPGs, and I have many more examples that I won't even bother mentioning right now for the sake of staying on topic. And again, this is way before identity politics or the woke movement took over popular culture. If there was a point in time when we could have fixed 40k, that point is long gone. I knew it was over when Games Workshop finally opened the gates of diversity and inclusion as a company. Not only because anything that goes woke turns to shit, but because I knew whatever chance we had at getting back on track was now obliterated. Corporate Games Workshop and DEI are the perfect match. The opportunity they've been waiting for decades. It allows them to bury their sins in a sea of smoke, to shift the subject of the conversation from terrible changes in the lore and rules to we need fucking female custodies or space marines. You give up on real fans of any IP, you give up the IP. That's the way it is. When Warhammer starts appearing on mainstream media, forget about the Warhammer you knew. It'll be a sanitized version of the IP, one that promotes cheap violence and forsakes any depth the franchise had at some point. This version will be the foundation for every new project coming up in the future. You have a broken IP that at some point was really interesting, thought-provoking, at best an introspection on the human experience taken to the limit, replaced by a soulless product by a corporation that no longer has the courage to provide something meaningful and intriguing, much less something visionary. And so they are reduced to recycling themselves over and over. You can see this pattern all over the place nowadays. Here is a space marine, but better, a primaris marine. Here's a custodian, but female. Here is some veteran infantry imperial guard, but as an old black woman. There's nothing new, there's nothing original. It's just more of the same old shit with a different coat of painting. The point of creating art is pushing the medium to the next level, and modern day Games Workshop lacks the creativity to do that. If they can achieve this breakthrough through their regular media or video games, I give a TV show produced by Amazon next to no chances of getting it done, even if the guy behind the whole production process is Henry Cavill. One of my main grievances with a TV series is deciding who the main character or characters are gonna be. I don't want a show where a space marine is the protagonist. This isn't me hating on space marines. I just don't think they are the most interesting characters in 40k. Sure, they have a really interesting lore, but their lives are ironically pretty boring. If you're a space marine, your life is basically going from war to war, risking it all and perhaps living through it only to do it all over again the day after. During your downtimes, you pray, you repent, go through some rituals, perhaps socialize a little bit if you're a space wolf or something, and then you go to war again. On paper, these stories sound pretty cool, but in practice, it gets old very quickly. You can't really go through a character arc. Space Marines don't really have character arcs. They are figures that in literature could be considered pretty much full circles from a narrative point of view. They don't really have much room for character growth, as the whole process to become a Space Marine is a hero's journey in itself. Every piece of drama that comes their way is in the form of a universal struggle, as in chaos corruption, for example, rather than something personal, because Space Marines don't really have any attachments to anything or anyone else other than their chapters. Ironically, this is why chaos factions are way more interesting in the lore. Turning to chaos restarts the hero's journey for a Space Marine. A downwards journey, sure, but a journey. No way Amazon has the balls to greenlight such a story though. This relegates Space Marines to the category of secondary characters. They have all the qualities for it. Only problem is, Space Marine chapters rarely rely on others to achieve their goals. Not only for the sake of keeping their chapter's affairs a secret, it's just that there's barely any regular human beings in the Imperium that will be able to keep up with a Space Marine, physically and mentally, which then makes them terrible secondary characters, as their power levels are way too advanced for regular humans. Even the Space Marine that joins your party in Rogue Trader needs to make a bullshit excuses to stay around. Another possible option for a main character would be a regular human. Depending on the kind of human, it will change the dynamics of the show entirely. If it's an Imperial Guard, most likely we'd end up with a pretty good TV series, but a really short one, as those guys have the mortality rate of a hamster. Same goes for Psychers. Even if that kind of character survive, you'd have someone entirely different a few seasons down the line, as Psychers keep mutating throughout their lives until they go completely crazy. And these are just the factions of human beings sitting at the bottom of the hierarchy. In this chart of the Imperium chain of command, each one of these boxes is plenty of material to warrant a TV series by itself. Problem is, no one will greenlight these kinds of projects because whenever people think of 40k, they think of Space Marines and esoteric, high gothic stuff. In the same way people think of lightsabers and Jedis whenever anyone mentions Star Wars. It's unfortunate, but if you have a brand like Warhammer, you get appeal to the normies in some way or another, which then forces the series to create mascots and symbolism for the sake of becoming recognizable. Which is why I believe the only point of compromise can be made if you make a Lord Inquisitor the main character for the live adaptation. Erasmus Brostow had it right in his short animation. A Lord Inquisitor will bridge the gaps to explore almost every facet of the Imperium. Even if you were to self-contain a whole season within the Inquisition itself, you'd still end up with a really interesting product. Those guys are easily the most drama-centric characters in the setting. Not only are they feared by pretty much everyone in the Imperium, they also have to watch their own backs against one another. In short, it's hard to fuck it up that way. But hey, this is Amazon. If they fucked up Tolkien's works, 40k doesn't stand a chance. Ideally, we should have something along the lines of Game of Thrones, with multiple characters going through their own journeys, ultimately interjecting paths towards a bigger plot point. Problem is, you require a talented writer to pull this off, and no matter how many billions, Amazon doesn't have a George R.R. Martin. Resources can buy real talent. Adaptations never live up to the source material. It reminds me of the game Rogue Trader and why adaptations are the scourge on the earth. For those of you who don't know, the game Rogue Trader was based on a series of guidebooks and novels by the same name released back in 2009. One of my viewers in my Discord server, Riches, is a big fan of both the lore and books, and so he actually interviewed me on the video game and also offered me more background information from the source material. And boy, the more you read about it, the more you hate the video game. No wonder Riches was outraged at Owlcat's version of Rogue Trader. They cut off around 95% of the source material in the final product. For starters, throughout the game it feels like your character is just an orphan roaming space. Same goes for every other Rogue Trader dynasty, by the way. Everyone's dynasty also got cut off by 95%, and even entire dynasties are simply cut out entirely, such as the Harlock, Disdain, and Bastal. And your Rogue Trader ship is also portrayed incorrectly. In the game you only have one ship, your own, whereas the book mentions massive fleets following you as the leader of your Rogue Trader house. The setting the game takes place in is also trimmed to a point it's almost unrecognizable. The Cronus Expanse is way more interesting in the books. It's a place full of Xenos species never seen before, some of which are even Chaos worshippers. The Cronus Expanse from the books is fascinating. There's so much content. I understand you need to trim some of it for the sake of production, but the final result is insulting to the original source material. It's soulless by comparison. That's my main grievance with modern adaptations. They don't understand what made the original great in the first place. They pick up a few elements and wear it like a costume. They streamline the experience for the average normie and dumb it down for the sake of simplicity. Adaptations these days are the equivalent of buying a book for dummies. And so that's what I think a Warhammer adaptation by Amazon will end up looking like. A streamlined, sanitized version of what made 40k a great franchise. These companies, like Amazon Prime, Netflix, or Apple TV, they all copy each other. They have one formula that's tried and tested, and all they do is apply it over and over, from project to project, which is far from what stories taking place in a grimdark setting should be. You can't play it safe with 40k. I can't stress this enough. Grimdark as a genre puts you in a box where no matter what you come up with, it's going to be offensive if you stick to it. So there's no point in trying to appease an audience as fragile as the woke mob. So in conclusion, Warhammer will finally go mainstream, become an irredeemable knockoff version of itself, and promote senseless violence while not trying to offend anybody's feelings, because grim darkness is too much for the modern day normie. As I said before, Westerners love violence but hate suffering, not realizing or perhaps choosing to ignore that the former inevitably leads to the latter. It's hypocrisy to the highest degree. I'm not saying you have to enjoy suffering, but if you're alive, you better find some meaning in the suffering that comes with it. You can't do that with violence. We don't have stories that explore this concept anymore. And it's a shame because the genre grimdark does bring such stories aplenty. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening. Bye.